I know I say this every year, but every year I mean it. The greatest 3 weeks in all of sports are finally here. This is March Madness, and I am Johnny Talk Sports, here to provide you with my 2023 NCAA tournament bracket, at least my main bracket, as this is the bracket that I will be putting into my tournament challenge, as I am once again hosting a tournament challenge, ESPN Tournament Challenge. So I will put the link to the group in the description box down below. So please feel free to join. The more people that join, the more fun the tournament will be. Without further ado, let's get right into it. I feel like I say this every year as well with the greatest 3 weeks in all the sports, but this is going to be the toughest bracket I've ever filled out. I do feel like a broken record sometimes saying it, but I feel like this year is an understatement. There doesn't feel like a clear cut favorite to cut down the nets at the end of this tournament. But starting off in the South region, Alabama, the number one overall seed, as they take on the winner of the play in game of one of the two 16 seed play in games, as I feel like it doesn't matter who comes out of that 16 seed playing game. I think Alabama wins no matter what. Maryland and West Virginia, and it's being reported right now on the NCAA scheduling website that this is the game that is going to kick off the tournament. Well, should I say tip off the tournament on Thursday? Maryland, West Virginia, an 8-9. This is going to be a good matchup. The 8-9s are always tough to predict, but I'm going with West Virginia. This feels like a coin flip, but I don't know. I just like West Virginia a little bit better for some reason. With it being an 8-9 matchup, I just don't know what it is. San Diego State and Charleston, the 5-12 in the South region. And I am going to pick the upset here. I'm going with Charleston. Charleston's a very underrated team, a team that can go on runs at any given moment. And the Mountain West, they do not have a good track record in the tournament as of late. I feel like Charleston over San Diego State is going to be a very popular upset pick, especially 12 over 5, as just about every year at least one 12 seed upsets the 5. And I think this one will be a very popular one. The 4 and 13, Virginia and Furman. Furman in the NCAA tournament, they were one shot away from being in the tournament last year. As Furman, they're a very experienced team, as is Virginia. I actually think Virginia is going to get pushed in this game, but I do think this is going to be the type of game that Virginia is going to win it with their defense, as they have one of the best scoring defenses, not only in this tournament, but in the entire country. So I'm going with Virginia, but I fully believe that Furman will push Virginia in this matchup. Up next, we have Creighton and NC State, the 6 and 11. And this one is a very tough one as well. Creighton, they got off to a hot start this season, then they went on a dry spell, then they got hot again. But there is some inconsistencies with Creighton. Creighton does not have a good bench, and that is something that's been costing Creighton these last several tournaments. But I do think they get past NC State. If Creighton is shooting the ball well, they are a tough team to beat. Baylor and UC Santa Barbara, the 3 and 14. Baylor, they have been struggling a bit lately, but I think that they win this matchup. I could see an upset here, as UC Santa Barbara, a couple years back, they were close to pulling off an upset in the first round. I think that Baylor, they should win this matchup, but I would not be surprised if they struggled in this matchup, if not lost the matchup completely. The 7-10, Missouri and Utah State. Once again, the Mountain West has not done good in recent tournaments. and they take on a Missouri team that has been flying under the radar throughout the year. I am going to be going with Missouri in this matchup. Up next, the 2-15, Arizona and Princeton. I'm going with Arizona. Arizona, they were a 1 seed last year, a very popular pick to win it all, including yours truly, but they fell short in the Sweet 16, as that was just a matchup where Houston played better. I feel like if that match was played 10 times over, I feel like Arizona would have won maybe at least 7 of those matchups. So Arizona, they now have some experience in the tournament, as that was a concern last year. But I think Arizona gets past Princeton. Moving on to the East region, Purdue and the winner of Texas Southern and Fairleigh Dickinson. Now, I am a very, very bitter person. I am petty. Fairleigh Dickinson does not belong in this tournament. I don't care what the rules are. This should be Merrimack's opportunity, but of course, rules and NCAA corruption. So I hope Texas Southern wins that play-in matchup. And to be honest, I like watching Texas Southern play basketball, especially in March. They are a pretty frequent attendant in this tournament. But either way, I'm going with Purdue to win that matchup. Memphis and Florida Atlantic. Another coin flip. The 8-9's always a coin flip. But I'm going to go with Memphis. But in half my brackets, I'm probably going to pick FAU. Because FAU, they are a team that I do think have some upside in this tournament. Duke and Oral Roberts. Yeah, the committee had to give us Duke versus Oral Roberts. And to tell you the truth, I feel like this could be a game that could start off the tournament. You got the Duke Blue Devils versus Oral Roberts, the Cinderella team that we have seen before. They were one shot away from going to the Elite Eight just 2 tournaments ago. And most of the players on that Sweet 16 run from 2021 are back. As for Duke, this is Jon Scheyer's first tournament as the Duke head coach. I get that Duke is hot, one of the hotter teams coming into the tournament, but I don't know if this is just me buying the hype of Oral Roberts, but I'm picking Oral Roberts to pull off the upset. I think Duke could be in for an early exit. Tennessee and Louisiana, the 4 and 13. Tennessee, they have injuries that are concerning going into the tournament. A very big presence on their roster out for the year. As several times throughout the tournament, especially in recent years, where there's been injury concerns, how are teams going to adapt to missing a very key piece to their roster? I think Tennessee figures it out in this first round, but after that, I don't know. I have Tennessee moving on. Although, if there were a 13-4 upset to take place, I would not be surprised if it was this one. Kentucky and Providence. Providence, they got off to a good start this season, but going into the tournament, they feel a little cold to me going into it. As Providence, they have fallen apart just a little bit in the last month and a half, while Kentucky, they aren't a threat this year. At least they're not a threat being talked about to cut down the nets. And I think that could bode well for Kentucky in this tournament. I'm picking Kentucky to move on. Kansas State and Montana State. I am going to go with Kansas State. Unbelievable year that Kansas State has had. I think they get past Montana State. Montana State, I mean, you never know. I was watching their semifinal game, and they don't really look like a tournament team to me, but of course this is March, so anything can happen. Michigan State and USC, the 7 and 10. Now this one's a tough one to call. The Big Ten does pretty well in the 7-10 matchups, and Tom Izzo is one of the more experienced coaches in this tournament, if not the most experienced coach in this tournament. So I'm gonna go with USC. This is a coin flip game for me. A lot of these games are coin flips, as every year there's a bunch of them, but this is just one of them. And I feel like if I did 10 brackets, I'd probably have 5 on Michigan State and 5 on USC. I just don't know what to think about Michigan State going into this tournament. Marquette and Vermont. Now, Marquette, they did have a scare against St. John's in the Big East tournament, but once you get to March, it's about survive and advance. So I think Marquette should handle Vermont with ease. Moving on to the Midwest region, Houston and Northern Kentucky. I'm going to pick Houston there. Iowa and Auburn. Another great 8-9 matchup. Iowa can get hot at any time, and Auburn plays good defense. But I'm going to pick Auburn to move on. Miami and Drake. Now, this one, I think, has potential of being an upset. Drake is one of the oldest teams in this tournament. Miami, they made an Elite Eight run last year until they lost to Kansas in the Elite Eight. As we know, Kansas eventually went on to win the national championship. I'm going to pick Miami, but I would not be surprised if Drake pulled off the upset. Indiana and Kent State. Kent State, I think, is a team that is flying under the radar coming to this tournament. As Kent State, they were just short of making the tournament last year. They have most of their players back, if not all of them, from last year's team that just missed the tournament. I'm going to pick Indiana, but I don't know. Something tells me that could be an upset waiting to happen. As most times we do get a 13/4. And I would not be surprised if one happened there, as we know the Big Ten's recent struggles in the NCAA tournament. Iowa State versus the winner of the playing game between Mississippi State and Pittsburgh. If it's Mississippi State, I think they could get past Iowa State. But if it's Pittsburgh, I definitely think they will beat Iowa State. So I'm going with the playing winner for now, but I just have to see how that playing game plays out. Next up, Xavier and Kennesaw State. Xavier, the NIT champions last year. Xavier's having an unbelievable season. As watching Xavier and A&M in the championship in the NIT, I was looking at it, and I was looking at what the teams would look like next year, and I thought that both the teams were going to make the Sweet 16. And oddly enough, if the bracket shapes out the way that it could shape out, then we could see him face off in the Sweet 16. So I'm going with Xavier over Kennesaw State. Texas A&M and Penn State, the 7-10 in the Midwest region. As Texas A&M and Penn State, they are two of the hottest teams coming into this tournament. A&M and Penn State, they both made great runs in their conference tournaments. As this game, it does feel close to 50-50, but I'd say I'm 60% with A&M and 40% Penn State, as these are two of the hottest teams entering the tournament. But I'm going with Texas A&M. Texas and Colgate. Texas, they dominated against Kansas in the Big 12 championship game. While Colgate, they have been making this tournament the past few years. And they have competed really well. They've competed well against Tennessee. They've competed well against Arkansas. They had Arkansas shaking in their boots in the first half of the game a couple years ago. And they had Wisconsin shaking in their boots for the first maybe 32 to 35 minutes of that game. As Wisconsin, they did not have that game wrapped up until the final few minutes. I really want to pick Colgate to pull off the upset. But Colgate, I've been a little bit fooled by them, thinking that they could pull off an upset. I haven't picked them to pull an upset, But you know what? It's March. Go big or go home. Scared money don't make no money. I am picking Colgate to upset Texas in the first round, as we usually have a 15 upset of 2 on occasion. We've seen 15 seeds pull off upsets. We had St. Peter's last year, go all the way to the Elite Eight. We had Oral Roberts go to the Sweet 16 just 2 years ago, close making the Elite Eight. But like I said, scared money don't make no money. It is March. Go big or go home. I'm picking Colgate to upset Texas in the first round. So on to the West region. Kansas and Howard. I'm going to pick Kansas to move on. Arkansas and Illinois. Now, Arkansas, they have made the Elite Eight in the past couple tournaments. Eric Musselman is one of those coaches that is built for the tournament. I'm going to pick Arkansas. St. Mary's and VCU. I'm going to go with St. Mary's. But I will say this, the 5 and 12 matchups this year, I think they could be the best 5-12s we've ever seen. Because we've got St. Mary's and a very underrated VCU team. We've got Duke and Oral Roberts. We've got Miami and Drake. We've got San Diego State and Charleston as 5-12 matchups. UConn and Iona, the 4 and the 13. I think that Iona is going to push UConn in this matchup, as Iona is coached by Rick Pitino. Rick Pitino, also a coach built for March. UConn, they lost in the first round last year to New Mexico State, a program that doesn't even exist right now. I'm going to pick UConn, but something tells me Iona is really going to push UConn to the brink in this game, as Iona did it a couple years ago against Alabama. Honestly, by the time the brackets lock, I could switch to Iona over UConn. TCU and the winner of Arizona State and Nevada. I'm going to pick TCU if it's against Nevada, but I think Arizona State if it's against TCU, so that could change. Gonzaga and Grand Canyon, I am going to go with Gonzaga, the 3 over the 14. Northwestern and Boise State. I am going to go with Boise State. I know the Mountain West doesn't do well in the tournament in recent years, but I just think that at least one Mountain West team is going to break through and win a game, and I think that's going to be Boise State. And UCLA and UNC Asheville, I'm going with UCLA. But I do think it's possible at some point that the injury to Jaden Clark is going to be a detriment to UCLA at some point, but it won't be this early. At least I don't think. Now on to the round of 32. Alabama and West Virginia. I think that this game could surprisingly be close, but I'm going with Alabama. Charleston and Virginia. Charleston is a team that has a great offense. They can go on runs at any time, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go with Charleston to upset Virginia. I have Charleston so far being at least one Cinderella team. Creighton and Baylor. I would be really 50-50 on this matchup, but I'm going to go with Creighton, actually. I haven't really been sure what to think about Creighton throughout the last month and a half, but Creighton, they can either beat anybody or they're going to be super inconsistent. And Baylor, they've been struggling as of late, so I'm going to go with Creighton to upset Baylor and advance in the Sweet 16. Missouri and Arizona, I am going to go with Arizona to move on. Purdue and Memphis. Now, Memphis, they have just about everybody back from last year, as they had Gonzaga really shook. They had them shaking in their boots throughout the majority of the game. Gonzaga, they couldn't pull away to the very end. And now they go up against Purdue. And I think, once again, Memphis will push Purdue, but I feel like Purdue was going to just survive that game. So I'm going Purdue. Oral Roberts in Tennessee. I am buying into the hype of Oral Roberts. I am going to pick Oral Roberts to advance to the Sweet 16. Although I will say that it's possible that there is some pressure on Oral Roberts, as we've seen Oral Roberts a couple years ago make a run, but I do really suspect that Oral Roberts will be a very popular Sweet 16 pick. So I am a bit nervous about that. Kentucky and Kansas State. I am going to go with Kentucky. It's been a great season for Kansas State, a team that really flew under the radar this year, but I just think with Kentucky being a 6 seed, I feel like that Kentucky doesn't really have as much pressure on them as they have in years past. I think it's going to bode well for them, as I mentioned already. USC and Marquette. I really want to pick USC to pull off this upset, but I feel like I got to go with Marquette. As we do usually have at least 1-2 seed exiting before the first weekend is complete. But I get that Shaka Smart has had his struggles in the NCAA tournament ever since his Final Four with VCU. But I just feel like this Marquette team is perhaps the most talented team that Shaka Smart has ever had. Houston and Auburn. I'm going to go with Houston. Miami and Indiana. I am going to go with Miami in this one. The winner of the play between Mississippi State and Pittsburgh. I feel like if it's Pittsburgh, I do think that Pittsburgh, they could strike the upset. But if it's Mississippi State, I don't think they can beat Xavier. So I'm going to have Xavier in this for now. But I think that could change depending on how the play-in game, how the first four plays out. Texas A&M and Colgate. I have Texas A&M moving on. Kansas and Arkansas, as we are going into the West region now. As I've said, Eric Musselman, he's been a coach that's built for March. He took Nevada to the Sweet 16, a couple Elite Eight appearances for Arkansas. In 2021, they just fell short of the Final Four. They lost the eventual national champions in Baylor, and last year they lost to Duke. So the last 2 years, they've been just short of the Final Four. And I'm aware of the defending champion's curse, as the defending champion has not made it past the second round. And I just think that if there is one team that could break this curse, it would be Kansas. So I am going to pick Kansas to beat Arkansas, although I would not be surprised if Arkansas pulled off this upset. St. Mary's and UConn. I am going to go with UConn in that matchup, although I feel like that game could go either way. TCU and Gonzaga. TCU almost pulled off a second-round upset against Arizona last year. They lost in overtime. But I just think that Drew Timme is going to be a mismatch in this game. I'm going with Gonzaga. And with Gonzaga being a 3 seed this year, perhaps less pressure on them, less expectations. We are used to them being a 1 seed, especially the number 1 overall seed. And the fact they're a 3 this year, perhaps this is going to bode well for Gonzaga. Boise State and UCLA. I'm picking UCLA to move on. It feels like at least every year there's one quadrant of the bracket that is chalk with the 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Sweet 16. I think that could be the West region this year. So on to the Sweet 16. Alabama and Charleston. I think Charleston's Cinderella run ends here. I'm going with Alabama. Creighton and Arizona. Now, they faced off against each other in the championship in the Maui Invitational. And Arizona, they won a very hard-fought game. And both these teams, even though Creighton, they went on a dry spell at one point in the year, I feel like playing those tough opponents, I feel like it has made them a better team. But I'm still liking Arizona to move on to the Elite Eight. Purdue and Oral Roberts. Does the Cinderella story continue, or does Zach Edey and the gang end the Cinderella run? I am going to say that Purdue moves on to the Elite Eight. Although, if Oral Roberts has a great night, if they're hitting their shots, they can pull off that upset. Kentucky and Marquette. I am going to pick Marquette to move on. Houston and Miami, the Midwest region now. I'm going to pick Houston to move on. Xavier and Texas A&M. If Texas A&M is if they're playing well, if they bring their A game, like Creighton, they can beat anybody in this tournament. And they were close to beating Xavier in the NIT championship last year. I get that it was last year, but I gotta go with Texas A&M in this year's matchup, a potential matchup. Kansas and UConn. I am going to go with Kansas. Gonzaga and UCLA to fill in the final spot in the Elite Eight. I think this is where UCLA is going to be missing Clark. I'm going to go with Gonzaga. On to the Elite Eight. Alabama and Arizona. I am going to pick Alabama to move on to the Final Four. Purdue and Marquette. Now, this is a very tough one. I'm going to take a risk here. I know that Shaka Smart, I've acknowledged it already. He does not have a good history in the tournament since VCU's Final Four run, but I think if there was to be a year that he can finally get back to the Final Four, I think it's this year. I think Marquette moves on to the Final Four. Houston and Texas A&M. It's been a great run for Texas A&M, but I just think that this Houston team is going to be too strong for them. I'm going with Houston to move on to the Final Four. And Kansas and Gonzaga. This is going to be a tough one. Kansas had the most quad one wins this season. They are the defending champs. This is going to be tough. This is really going to be tough here. I'm going to go with Kansas. As my Final Four is Alabama, Marquette, Houston, and Kansas. I don't know if I feel good about having 3 ones in the Final Four, but I do feel like with the crazy tournament we had last year, I do feel like that this one's going to be more stagnant the later on you get. And even if it is a crazy tournament, you usually have at least 2 ones in the Final Four most years anyway. So I feel like this bracket could be okay. Alabama and Marquette. I'm going to go with Alabama in the first semifinal. And the second semifinal, Houston and Kansas. I am going to go with Kansas. I am a bit worried about that because until a team reverses the curse of defending champions getting knocked out in the first weekend, the curse is still intact. So my championship matchup, Alabama and Kansas, and cutting down the nets in Houston, I am going to go with Alabama. Now, I do feel like Alabama, they have been the best team throughout these last few weeks. They did have their games where they had scares. And the later on you get in the regular season, the more you actually want to have scares. As out there, they had multiple scares. But they have handled the SEC tournament. They dominated the SEC tournament championship game against A&M. They avenged their loss from a week prior by winning by 20 plus. Plus, if Alabama gets eliminated early, it really wouldn't bother me because my strategy coming into this bracket was to pick a team that I don't want to win, and then maybe they will win. But I have Alabama cutting on the nets over Kansas. So comment your final four. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, have a great day. And feel free to join the tournament group. Once again, it's in the description box down below.